no single factor will 100% contribute to the situation of people living in any state. And if you want to diagnose, ideally, do not attribute everything to a single reason. Let's say, compare Israel with Bihar. There is a very interesting idea in geography optional also. You will see this. Your geography will determine how well you will perform, but there are some outliers, Israel being one of them. Despite the geographical disadvantages that Israel has, it still managed to come out of those situations and make a mark for themselves and sustain a lifestyle that is considered on par with some of the best leading nations across the world. Now, in this context, we are comparing that with Bihar. What is the diagnosis of Bihar's backwardness? This is the central theme of this entire debate. There are two sides. One side attributes it to the geographical disadvantage that Bihar has, and the other side says that this is merely a reason to explain why it is backward. There can be some measures that can be taken, and if those measures are taken, Bihar can come out of this geographical disadvantage. And there is an element of truth on both the sides. And as a policy maker, as a bureaucrat, as a UPSC aspirant, what I would recommend is that ultimately in the mains exam, what they are testing is the proportion that you are attributing to one factor. Let's say you think if you want to map out and lay down a canvas of 100% of the reasons that attribute to Bihar's backwardness, this person who believes that major reason is landlockedness, you are trying to explain things away. You are portraying a situation as if we can't do anything about it. And that's not a kind of mindset that you wouldn't want to project that in the exam paper, right? See, we are not here for GAN. We are here for a single point agenda to utilize whatever discussions that we have from newspapers and transfer that understanding and wisdom into the paper. So out of the 100% that you see, if you have to visualize it, out of 100%, how much are you attributing to each factor to explain the present situation of Bihar's backwardness? This should be the ultimate takeaway from that discussion. Let's say if you want to list down all the reasons and you don't know, let's say you are in a exam hall and you don't know any data pointers. If you were in the exam hall, how would you think? Yes? Can you tell me the reasons, list down all the reasons? Geography, okay. What else? Governance. What about governance? Is it about the very design or is it about the execution? Or both? Design, execution. What else? Does history have a play? What is the role of history? Okay, let's divide it. Pre-independence, post-independence. Do you see any events from the post-independent India affecting the policies of Bihar? Are they 100% contributing to the backwardness of Bihar? No. They are only adding up. I want you to develop that mindset. No single reason will ever explain the situation of any social phenomenon in this exam preparation. It's not an either or kind of a thinking. It's not geography alone. It's not history alone. It's not science and technology alone. It's not the social structures alone. We are not talking about society, casteism, etc. Class difference, caste difference. Economic models. What is the kind of economic model we have? Is there, okay, what are the three sectors of economy? Primary, secondary, tertiary. Do you have any industrialization in Bihar as much as it should be? No. Do you have a service sector? No. Predominantly agrarian. Heavily caste ridden. Geographically disadvantaged. Poor governance design. Poor execution. History has a role. Pre-independent exploitation of the farming community, leading to low literacy, low life expectancy, and poor socio-economic conditions, which is amplified by the existing social discrimination. Add to that, geographical disadvantage gives a limitation on the policy choices that governments have. Even after post-independence, we have made some significant miscalculations. Let's say, for example, there is an overemphasis even in the Green Revolution. Even in crops, the philosophy of the government did not change for a very long time. What do I mean by the philosophy of the government here? From 1947, what is the role that governments envisioned for farmers? They said they were nation builders because they were protecting the country from dying of hunger. Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. They have placed the farmers and the soldiers on the same pedestal for safeguarding this nation. However, whatever from 1947, this actually 60s, 70s, when the Green Revolution took off, this was the motto in the 60s and 70s. Tragically enough, the situation has not progressed from there, neither for the farmers nor for the narrative. What do I mean by this? What is the value you gain out of agriculture? How much money are you making out of agriculture? Is agriculture treated as a business? No. If a farmer wants to do business, somehow it is looked down upon, and somehow the conditions are in such a way that there is some kind of a shame in accepting that I want to make money out of agriculture. While this narrative exists, you also have a structural inequality where large farmers are usually extremely wealthy because they have large tracts of land, and because of their historical access to education, etc., they have also gained control over large tracts of land in rural agrarian Bihar, and they still to this date gain more value out of agriculture in proportion to everybody else. When you have so many different problems, and on the top of that you also have the so-called resource curse. What do you mean by this resource curse? There are decently enough natural resources in Bihar, in the bordering areas of Bihar and Jharkhand, and yet they can do very little to extract value out of it due to the over domination of the public sector units, where there is bureaucracy, red tapeism, and very low opportunity cost. I mean, very high entry barrier and high opportunity costs that are there for private players to participate. So there is no incentive for the private sector. There is no education, no skills, governance, geography, history, In every dimension, they are falling behind. So no single reason can attribute to the backwardness, and if you are trying to do that, it's sort of a subpar policy examination and accepting mediocrity in policy imagination, which UPSC doesn't want from you guys. Looking at the nature of questions, you are getting a lot of interdisciplinary questions. Your geography determines your history determines your society determines your culture, but all of them can change with policy intent. That is why policy is extremely important. Yes, policy should accommodate the social realities, but it should not conform to the social realities and accept whatever is wrong as nothing can be done. Policy and constitution exist for a reason. That reason being social transformation. Which now takes us to the one more article that is given in Hindu today. Let's go back to that. I think that article is missing. So basically that article is a criticism on the politicization of various roles played by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and other dignitaries who contributed equally to this whole idea of constitution. See, who is the first constitutional advisor? B.N. Rao. But do you see a discourse on Mr. B.N. Rao as much as we find a discourse on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar? So this present article, I'm missing that article here, but anyway, it's posted on the Telegram channel as well. You can go back and read it. The point that I'm trying to bring to the table here, what is the takeaway for our examination? Just like in the article on Bihar where you explain away the present situation and attribute it to one reason which is wrong, similarly the contribution of many dignitaries who contributed in their own way to the Indian Constitution and the drafting of the various phases of the Indian Constitution, they should not be ignored. Why? What happens if we ignore the contributions of others who are no longer existing? Can you tell me? Let's say if there is a narrative that only Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has been the sole contributor to Indian Constitution, what is the problem? Because at the end of the day, the message is important, not the messenger, right? Then why is this that we are focusing on the messenger also? That's fine, he's no longer existing, there is a spirit of that philosophy. We are merely talking about who gets credit. Why is it important to give due credit to respective stakeholders in any process? What can happen if we don't give due credit? These people are no longer existing. Correct. We are setting a precedent for the future generations. And if the next generations believe that fame is the only driver or the motivation for our actions, the legacy that they can add to this idea of nation building can be hijacked. As such, this article writer is not denying the kind of role that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had. The radical moral philosophy that he brought to the table, whether it is in the form of rights or the whole instruments that he placed in the Constitution to ensure that this practice of untouchability or the caste-based discrimination, or to that fact any discrimination based on race, religion, caste, sex and place of birth, all of them have a tinge of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's thought process. And if you are denying that, we are also denying that India's existence as a republic is, taken for granted even in the future generations. We have to attribute that definitely to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Having said that, according to this writer, the problem with this present narrative that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar is the sole idea or the genesis of the Indian Constitution, and merely reducing him to the chairman of the drafting committee, ignoring his moral philosophy, that is a problematic issue for the writer. Where can you use this article? This is a theme called revision of the Constitution. When I say revision, it doesn't mean we are trying to go back and amend and reinterpret. Revision here in its truest sense mean revision. Whatever narrative that is presented to us as a vision, if it is distortive in nature, sometimes we have to go back, revisit, revision or re-envision the actual role of the various stakeholders in our constitution, their individual contributions, and see their social backgrounds as a precedent for the future generations. For example, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has been the representative of the Dalit identity, and various social groups also contributed in his success. Even when he talks about the caste-based discrimination, it is the forward castes that actually helped and brought him to that position. And Dr. B.R. Ambedkar nowhere denies that, nowhere claims the entire credit. So by hijacking this whole narrative and projecting as if Dr. B.R. Ambedkar himself asked for all that credit and discredited all the people that helped him by showcasing only that identity, the danger that the future generations will have is developing a bias. We don't want social fractures within the society. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was a humanist. He believed in the human dignity. He believed that the human consciousness had something common at the core, and that whole idea of caste is acting as a barrier to see that humanness in the other person. This is what he stood for. In the present political narratives, if it is hijacked by a few sections of the society, the other side will refuse to see that. And if this continues for the next generations, there is a danger of an alienation of an identity itself and the philosophy that that person stood for. To ensure that danger doesn't happen, it is important for people to recognize the needs of various sections of the society and also acknowledge the contributions of the other constitutional makers in the drafting of our constitution. Not just in the drafting of constitution. Patriotism doesn't mean you have to fight at the border alone. If everybody does their own duty with utmost diligence and utmost commitment, you are contributing to the idea of nation building. And this is the takeaway from that article. Okay, moving forward. Ensure safeguards for India's urban markets. Okay, let's go to GS3 now. What is the idea behind a carbon market? Let's say there are two set of businessmen. One person runs an industry that is essentially adding carbon to the atmosphere. And the second person is having an industry that is essentially taking out carbon. Now, if all of us as a government, as a respective stakeholder of this global citizenship that we have, all the people in the world, all the nations, the corporates, civil society bodies, individuals, all of them agree to come onto a platform where you will be rewarded and penalized for the amount of carbon that you release. In such a kind of a framework, the one who absorbs carbon will have an incentive, and the one who releases carbon will have to get punished and get penalized for it. In order to ensure that balance is restored, carbon credit is one such market driven mechanism. Let's say if a carbon credit, one carbon credit is, let's say, 100 rupees. If you release 1 unit of carbon, you have to pay 100 rupees to the government or to any other person. Now what if you make it, instead of a government driven thing, market driven thing? You have to buy a carbon credit certificate saying that I contributed financially, and that carbon certificate is actually produced by another player who is absorbing it. There is a buyer, there is a seller, and at the undercurrent, the derivative on the basis of which this entire trade is happening is the technology that releases or absorbs carbon. This is carbon credit mechanism. The genesis of this idea goes back to the Conference of Parties, the 5th Conference of Party in Kyoto in 1997. However, this idea did not take off as expected. India also had its own version of market mechanisms for reducing carbon emissions. None of them really took off. But recently, India decided that we will start having a comprehensive carbon market. The idea behind that is, we have the commitment towards the Paris climate deal, the Panchamrit strategy, or the commitments that were upgraded in the 26th Conference of Parties in Glasgow in 2021. Here we committed that we will increase our commitment towards climate change, and nearly 500 gigawatts of renewable energy will be produced, which roughly should amount to 50% of the energy produced then. So by 2030 or 35, 30, if 1000 gigawatt of energy is produced, electricity is produced, half of it should come from renewable. Also, in the Paris climate deal, we agreed that 2.5 to 3 billion ton of carbon dioxide from the levels of 2005, we will absorb that. Even though we did not update the commitment in 2021, we still want to promote this through the carbon market mechanisms. This is the explainer of how a carbon market will work, the genesis of that idea, and the respective conferences in which this discussion is relevant. Even after that, we have seen recent summits also discuss this idea, and the problem with this idea, in an Indian case, also in the global scenario, especially when the markets are involved, that is the subject matter of discussion here. Right? So, we are at a junction where we are looking at a public-private partnership, and rightly so, because dealing with climate change is not a job of a single person or a single government. Every human being, every stakeholder residing on this earth has a role to play in this. Now, what is the problem with this mechanism? Now I am raising a slightly controversial topic. There are a lot of allegations here, and most of you might be guessing what I am going to talk about. I am talking about the much hyped Vantara project led by the Reliance Foundation. So there are a lot of environmentalists who claim that the whole tract of land in Jamnagar is actually a early investment into the so-called carbon market mechanism. Because if Reliance Foundation is contributing to carbon sequestration, they'll get to generate a lot of carbon credits, which will have a revenue generating potential, and also it's a good PR. What is the problem with it? So be it. This is not a problem, right? If a company is doing that activity and is generating good PR, so be it. This is one side of the argument. But if you go to other parts of the world and look at examples from Africa, that is where the story begins. Let's say if carbon sequestration becomes a lucrative career or a lucrative business, not a career, what if large corporates go into those countries which are already poor, take away the lands of the marginalized communities at throwaway prices, and the deals do not have any element of legal transparency? They do not have any rights. There is no social audit. There is no displacement alternative for the marginalized and the displaced communities. What is the situation then? There are early evidences that we see from Africa in countries like Kenya. If that legal safeguards are not embedded within the carbon markets, the already conflicted subject of land and land litigation becomes even more complicated. Real estate in India, especially in the context of increasing population, where we are witnessing a trend where we are moving towards almost 160-170 crore population with the same 3 to 4% of the global land. You are expected to have food security, carbon sequestration, real estate, residential, industrialization, everything in the same 3 to 4% of land. And therefore, in cities, you see no other option but to increase the height of our structures. Real estate is getting expensive. There are a lot of litigations. In Hyderabad itself, you see the cost of 1 acre land touching 110-120 crore in the prime areas. What would be the value extraction out of it? What kind of businesses can thrive on those pieces of land? Unless we attract global opportunities, it's going to be extremely carbon intensive. The footprint is extremely high. The footprint in terms of economics, in terms of ecology, in terms of the population pressure on that piece of land, in terms of the life of people and their quality. Imagine coming out at that peak traffic hour, either in Bangalore or in Hyderabad, in that area, and there is a huge rain. Imagine the situation and the present infrastructure levels. We do not have that kind of infrastructure. On the top of that, there is this new layer of carbon markets which can cause a potential threat. And therefore, experts say that we need safeguards to ensure that this doesn't happen. In this article, what do I want you to pick up? Take a look at this. There are some ethical arguments that we can pick up from African nations and the judicial bodies over there. Take a look at this. The Kenyan judgment is a timely warning. Unless land rights, consent, fair benefit sharing are secured, Indian carbon markets risk reproducing the extractive models under the guise of climate action. There is a situation here given that happened, how the community reserves, the forest community reserves that existed in Kenya were literally hijacked by some corporate interests, and it took a lot of litigation to address it. But in the meanwhile, a lot of common people must have suffered. Such kind of a predicament can be avoided if India takes proactive measures. This is the central argument of this article. So what did we learn? You learned what is a carbon market, its mechanisms, and as a homework, I am asking you to go back and check the conference of parties involved in this discussion, the schemes of India prior to this carbon markets. For example, there is perform, achieve and trade, PAT scheme. What is the status of that PAT scheme going to be like after carbon markets come into existence? Is it going to stay as it is? If yes, what is the process? If it is going to be removed, how is it going to be merged into the new idea of carbon markets, or is it completely different? This is the kind of research or the curiosity I want you to exhibit. If I tell, you might not exactly remember, but if you go back and do the homework, this is a very important evolving idea. You will definitely see the reward when unexpected questions pop up. Okay, moving forward. The last article for the day is about Ayushman Bharat. The National Health Authority, which is the governing body that runs this scheme, released a report showcasing the status of the utility of the scheme. What is the observation from this data? As you can read, most of the people using this insurance scheme are preferring private hospitals, not government hospitals. Probably a few weeks ago, we discussed the danger of insurance driven model in a country like India, where profiteering can be a possibility. How does this work? What is the insurance model? Let me briefly take you back to that discussion of what are the two public healthcare delivery models. One is the institution led and the other is the insurance led. When I say institution led, government will directly involve in creating the hospital infrastructure, the doctors, the entire machinery, along with the services and the drugs and the tests, diagnostic tests and the records of the entire set of population, to cater to this idea of universal healthcare delivery. The other side of the argument, or the other side of debate on what should be the healthcare delivery mechanism, we have the insurance led model. A precedent for the institution led is the UK model, National Health Service. On the other hand, the insurance driven model is the one that is led by US. Here you will witness the involvement of the private player in US. Every citizen will pay an insurance premium, and that insurance premium will be safeguarding them, and government will be using those premiums to hand over the healthcare. Yes, there is an element of state-led spending also in US, but predominantly it is led by insurance. In India, we have the flagship scheme called the Ayushman Bharat. What is the scheme? More or less like the insurance driven model, but the only difference is the premium that the beneficiaries are paying or the target group is paying is very minimal. Most of it is funded by the government alone. But you have to remember, is health a state subject or a central subject? Is this scheme a central sector scheme or a centrally sponsored scheme? With that context, read this article now, especially these two highlights. Okay? There is no point in me explaining and reading out the statistics, but to know the difference between the information and the insight that you can get, you need to know the context. Therefore, current affairs is not about knowing information, it is current awareness that is actually being tested in UPSC. There is a difference between current affairs and current awareness. What you are expected to know is current awareness, the ability to generate an insight rather than information. So no point by hearting that information. Okay? I hope you go back and read these articles and take away the insights from this discussion. That's it for the day. See you on Tuesday again. We won't be having a class on Monday due to Diwali. I wish you a very happy Diwali.